This is, this is relevant to the topic here, but Chloe said, Genesis 18, Abraham fed three angels, not God himself. Assuming this is...
Well, we will talk some more about that, but that's just not what the text says. In Genesis 18:1, it says that Abraham looked up. He's near the oaks of Mamre, and he saw the Lord. The Lord appeared to him. And then when he looks up, he sees three men. First of all, that's what the text says. He sees three men. Then it's the later context that further identifies these three quote unquote men that Abraham sees. In one case, it says one of the figures was the Lord. It uses the covenant name of God, Yehovah. And then the other two leave the company of Abraham and the Lord, and they go down into Sodom in Genesis 19. 19 verse 1 says the other two were angels. So if we're actually looking at the text of Genesis 18, and we're not being Muslims and taking out what we don't like, we see that one person is the Lord and the other two are angels. What should be problematic here for Muslims is that God is appearing here in the form of a man. What I find remarkable about this is not being a Muslim, I don't have any problem with God appearing in history, but what I expect is the sort of thing I see in places like Ezekiel 1 or Ezekiel 10, where God appears in awesome glory that's terrifying to the people beholding him. So Ezekiel falls down like a dead man, right? And you get the same sort of thing in Exodus 3 when Moses encounters God at the burning bush. He turns his face away because he's afraid to look at God. Or the people at Mount Sinai when the whole mountain is ablaze and God speaks from the mountain, and they're terrified and say, Moses, you speak to us. We don't want to hear directly from God anymore. That's the sort of thing I expect. What I don't expect is what you see in Genesis 18. Well, now I do as a Christian, obviously, but when you read it, it's so mundane. God is appearing there like a man. At first, not even Abraham seems to be aware who this visitor is. He rushes to tell Sarah to make food for them. He wants to tend to their needs, clean their feet, and so forth. He doesn't appear to know who his guests are. And that's what's, I think, startling. But to Muslims, it should be downright unnerving. It undermines their entire religion. God appears in time and space, and he appears in the form of a man. It's almost sounding Christian.
Yeah. And I'm wondering how some of this stuff is going to connect to Jesus' claim in the New Testament that Abraham knew something about him. Quick comment here from our good friend Fareed Responds, the guy who watches all our stuff and constantly posts videos about us, but never, ever, ever wants to join us live, no matter how many times we invite him. He says, nice to see David bringing someone that doesn't believe that Jesus is a fraud. So this is interesting. Looks like Fareed is affirming your belief in Jesus, Anthony. Why don't you go ahead and tell him the Jesus that you believe in?
I just spoke about him. He was the one that appeared to Abraham. And better than my testimony is the testimony of Jesus. In John 8, and this is what you were alluding to a moment ago, Jesus makes it clear that he knew Abraham and Abraham knew him. They had a face-to-face knowledge of each other. What's interesting about John 8, before you ever get to the end, which is what most people look at relevant to this, earlier in the chapter, the Jews, they're engaged in a protracted debate with Jesus, and they're making these competing claims about paternity. Jesus is talking about who their father is. They're talking about who their father is. He's talking about his father. They're asking about his father. There's all these different levels in the discourse that are going on. The Jews at times don't know who he means by his father, and they don't like what he's saying about their father. But at one point, so Jesus says, if Abraham were your father, you wouldn't be trying to kill me. Abraham did not do this. Now, the way people normally read that is all too cavalier. They read that as though Jesus is just saying that your character traits, your behavior is not like that of your father. Your father was hospitable, right? He didn't try to kill people. What Jesus is saying is actually more pointed in the Greek text. When Jesus says Abraham did not do this, the antecedent of the pronoun there, this, is Abraham did not try to kill me. Or is it, if Abraham were your father, you would not be trying to kill me. Abraham did not do this. What is this? That is, try to kill me. So Jesus is saying there was an occasion when Abraham had the opportunity to give it a shot, but he didn't try. Abraham didn't do that. And that's why later in the conversation, the Jews finally get the point and they say, wait, you're not yet 50 years old and you've seen Abraham? And Jesus said, I tell you the truth, before Abraham became, I am. So there's Jesus' interpretation of the Old Testament. Jesus thinks that the Old Testament testifies to him.
And interestingly, that is the view of Jesus that Fareed regards as not a fraud. So Fareed put his stamp of approval on everything that Antony just said about his view of Jesus. Thank you, Fareed, for the cosign. I think you're an apostate now, Fareed, just by saying that. But no, Fareed, keep in mind that, even though various people on my live stream may have different views of Jesus, we can all agree that Muhammad is the most obvious false prophet in history. You agree to that, Antony?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. A couple more super chats here just so we don't get too